to move that thing out of the way.
Do one of those, like, I see those backgrounds that some people have, like there's like a palm tree and stuff like that. You seen those?
Yes, they make people's faces all fuzzy. Like the edges of people's faces seem to, like, they get a bit strange. So I considered that initially and then chose not to. I don't know about anybody else if you're using them.
I've seen them, but I don't use them.
No.
Yeah.
Dylan, I don't think you use them. I'm going to make a guess.
I've never tried to use one, but I always get a chuckle when I see one. I was like, oh, that would be kind of fun. But
put yourself in Hawaii.
Yeah. Folks that are joining us, we'll get started in a few minutes here. We'll just give people a few more minutes. If it's anything like a mile to marathon group practice, everyone will show up about 3 minutes late and talk amongst themselves for another 10 minutes before we get started, but hopefully we won't give them that long.
Dylan, is it both Vancouver and Ottawa joining?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Hopefully we'll have people from both groups got the info on it. So yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. So it should be good. Oh. My phone is dinging that this is happening. Thanks, phone.
You getting your Google reminder?
Yeah, Zoom like.
Zoom likes to do it.
It's chirping at me. Try and get it to be quiet. I think there was about 24 people that registered ahead of time, but 12, I don't know if that included us, but there's about 12 people in there right now. So we'll give people a few more minutes.
Cool. Dylan, how many people do you have in Mile to Marathon in Vancouver versus Ottawa?
Vancouver is definitely bigger. There's about 150 in Vancouver, and here we're about 60 in Ottawa.
That's awesome. Yeah. Cumulatively, though, that's pretty great. Uh-oh.
We've athletes that are being coached remotely, just kind of here and there and everywhere.
Yeah, that's a cool thing. That's a cool thing about being able to coach remotely, huh? You can have them everywhere.
Yeah, it's kind of fun. My favorite updates are from my athletes that are in St. John's, Newfoundland. They just, I don't know how they run. They're just like, every time it's like, it's either minus 40 and 10 feet of snow, or it's just like 80 kilometer-hour winds.
I bet they have beautiful places to run, though.
That's true. That's what must get them at the door, the scenery.
I've never been to Newfoundland, but I've only heard it's beautiful. Like, so yes, that must be what gets them out the door.
Okay, well, I think this is a good time to start. People are asking if they can tell that you are, yes, Kate, we can tell you're there. This is a new format. For those that have joined us before, we're trying the webinar format, which shows just me and our panelists for tonight. But everyone else is here. You guys can chime in, I believe, with the Q&A function. Can people out there see that? There's like a box. You should be able to like punch in questions too. Well, we certainly have a chat anyway. And Kate's giving everyone a big cheer. You guys see that chat? Yeah? Okay. Well, why don't we get started? So tonight we have three panelists who I will allow to introduce themselves in just a minute, but thanks to everyone for joining us. Tonight we are going to talk mental health and mental performance, which is a topic that our athletes are, or topics that our athletes are always asking us about. So it's great to have this group of experts here with us tonight. So thank you to Cheryl and Lisa and Shannon for joining us. We've kind of reached into different corners or different pockets of our networks to bring the three of you together. So the format for tonight, so folks know, is I'll try and moderate the conversation a little bit, but really we just want the three of these ladies to be having a conversation on some different topics. And we want everyone watching and listening in to contribute as well. So as I said before, I believe there's a kind of a Q&A box that people can ask their questions in. If not, you can just throw them into the chat and I'll figure out how it goes. So let's get an intro from each of you, maybe just a short bio, who you are, what you're up to. And we'll start with Cheryl, who I know is in Brooklyn, New York.
Good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see you, I think, virtually. My name is Cheryl Donald. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist here in New York State. I am the owner of Brooklyn Marriage and Family Therapy, PLLC, which is a private psychotherapy practice here in New York City, where I primarily see individuals, couples, and some families sprinkled here and there full-time. I work for the Federal Department of Health and Human Services here in the States, because I understand that some of you all are not in the States. And I also, in my spare time, run with the Brooklyn Track Club here in Brooklyn, New York. And I'll say hello to Kate, who is one of our coaches for the women's team. So it's nice to virtually see Kate through the chat. So looking forward to having this conversation with Lisa and Shannon. And thank you, Dylan, for the invitation.
Cool. Great. Thank you so much for joining us. Lisa, I think you're in Regina, correct?
Yeah, I am in Regina. So I'm a registered psychologist and a mental performance consultant. I work primarily with athletes in a range of different topics. Some of them are going to be more performance focused, looking at field of play competition, and some of them are going to be more from a mental health perspective, but really trying to take a whole picture perspective in terms of who they are as a person and how that contributes to their performance. So a lot of that is with provincial athletes, but also at a national level as well. I do work with Game Plan, which is a program through Canadian Olympic Committee and Canadian Paralympic Committee that helps athletes to enhance their overall wellness and look at their performance in sport, but also out of sport as they kind of transition through their athlete career.
Very cool. And you are also an M2M athlete, correct?
Yes, I am. I'm a virtual athlete and I work with Kate.
Woo! That's wicked. And last but certainly not least, Shannon, who is in Flagstaff, Arizona.
Yeah, hi. I'm Shannon. I am originally from Vancouver, although currently in Flagstaff, Arizona. And right now I work with, I'm a mental performance consultant, and I work primarily with distance runners with Northern Arizona University here in Flagstaff, as well as NAZ Elite here in Flagstaff, and then a handful of other athletes around the US and Canada. My educational background is in a field called positive psychology, which is the study of human well-being and high achievement. And my own athletic background is I actually rode horses professionally for a really long time. I was a equestrian. And now I would call myself a committed amateur runner, everything from 5K to 50K.
Getting into those ultras in Flagstaff, you can't help yourself.
Can't help it in Flagstaff.
Good. Good. Well, this is great. I know when we were chatting before, all four of us, it came together nicely that we felt everyone had really complementary backgrounds and expertise to bring to the table. So I think where I wanted to start was, the topic for tonight was mental health and mental performance. So I was hoping maybe we could just kind of think about or break down a little bit of the similarities and differences between mental health and even emotional health, and then mental performance. What are some similarities and differences, and why those are important, and how they can come into play for all of our athletes? So Cheryl, maybe you can start us off with kind of your clinical background and getting that piece on the table for people.
Sure. So I'll talk a little bit about what mental health is, and I'll talk a little bit about the difference between mental health and emotional health, and then dive a little bit into mental illness. I think it's good to lay the foundation of what the differences are between the three as we have our conversation. So the World Health Organization defines mental health as a state of well-being in which an individual realizes his or her own abilities and can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make contributions to his or her community. So that's the definition of mental health, according to the World Health Organization. In terms of emotional health is typically defined as the degree to which you feel emotionally secure and relaxed in your everyday life, the positive management and expression of your emotional actions and reactions void of any unhealthy stress or depression. So that's how we define emotional health. And then thirdly, when we look at mental illness is a medical condition that disrupts a person's thinking, feeling, mood, ability to relate to others, and daily functioning. So similar to diabetes as a disorder of the pancreas, mental illness is a medical condition that can often result in a diminished capacity for coping with ordinary demands of life. So those are the three definitions to kind of lay the foundation for our discussion. Any initial thoughts or questions about those three? I know we can't hear everyone, but if you want to post something either in the chat or the QA, feel free to do that. So as you all are thinking about those questions, just want to pose the point that you can be emotionally healthy or emotionally unhealthy and not mentally ill, okay? But you cannot be emotionally healthy if you have an unresolved mental illness. So often when we talk about our mental state or our emotional state, sometimes there's stigma there where we want to talk about what issues are going on with us because we may fear that someone is going to think we have a mental disorder or we have a mental issue. And when really we might just be emotionally unhealthy. And usually that is triggered by maybe a life stressor. Obviously we are undergoing one of the largest life stressors in the history of time with the pandemic, and everyone across the world trying to manage this. It's not surprising if folks are having a little bit of difficulty managing their emotions. However, it might not be to the level where we're clinically depressed, but we are actually feeling a difference in how we are handling normal stressors that perhaps were not a challenge for us before.
Cool, that's really good. And how, Cheryl, like how do you work with your clients or even friends to kind of push past that stigma that you talk about so that they're kind of in a place where they feel comfortable and confident kind of opening up to you know the possibilities of where their mental state is at?
Well, one of it is really about normalizing. And so when someone shares a feeling that they may be expressing or have a concern about how they're adjusting, let's say, to the quarantine, or they're noticing that their training is a little bit off, or perhaps now that they're training individually, it feels a little bit different than when they're working with the team, and they may vocalize that. So normalizing it is very important, having conversations, letting people know that they are not the only ones who may be experiencing what's going on, putting things in context for people. Oftentimes we feel as though we are the only ones experiencing something at any given time, even knowing that everyone is quarantined in their own homes. For some reason, these things are just happening to us. So really being able to normalize that, I think, is important to begin the conversation. And then, of course, to reassure people that when we're talking about our emotional state, it doesn't necessarily mean that we are going to the level of a mental diagnosis or medication or anything that significant.
Cool. Okay. And I want to get back to at some point later in the conversation the point around people's emotions and mental state around running solo versus getting in the group. So maybe we can come back to that in a little bit. But I was hoping that Lisa, maybe you could tie in the mental performance piece of this for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think maybe historically there's been a bias against athletes having any sort of mental health or mental illness issue. And we're seeing a lot of people speaking out, professional athletes, athletes at an Olympic level, athletes across Canada that are saying that they have these things, and that's starting to normalize that they are experiencing different mental health disorders and mental illnesses. And by speaking out about it, it's becoming more common. I think that's been a really helpful step to know that we can be athletes and still experience some of these things. So typically when I talk about this, I like to look at mental health on a continuum, and I think Cheryl's done a really good job at explaining the differences between those different areas. But when we look at mental performance specifically, that's going to be looking at basically the psychological, emotional, and social components that help to increase our ability to grow and excel in performance domains. And obviously we're speaking to this from an athletic perspective, but performance domains can be in any of the different pursuits that you have in your life. So it could be in a business perspective. I know surgeons and astronauts can be people that use this as well. Artists, dancers, all these different perspectives. Typically in my work, obviously I'm focusing it more on athletes, but it's really being able to use those mental skills to develop awareness and to develop regulation strategies that help to increase functioning and increase performance. And so again, we typically look at this from an athletic perspective, but I think these are all things that we can be applying in our day-to-day life to help navigate the different stressors and challenges that we're experiencing just as individuals.
Cool, cool. And Lisa, can you talk to me a little bit about the difference between, I'm more familiar with from back in the day when I was running sports psych versus mental performance. Is there a lot of difference there?
Yeah, good question. Sports psychology, I guess, is a typical term and probably more well-known, better known. The issue is that it's got the term psychology, and typically what we're finding now is only a registered psychologist or someone with a psychology background is able to use that term. So sports psychology and mental performance consulting are basically the same thing. They just would have a different designation or a different background. So mental performance consultant would typically go through kinesiology or counseling and have some sort of sport background in terms of the schooling that they're taking, whereas psychology is more typically counseling focused, psychology focused. So that's the differentiation, but typically in practice they're doing very similar things.
Cool, thanks so much. And Shannon, you are a mental performance consultant, correct? So your focus is more on that side of things. Do you find that you're still drawing a lot to these mental health and emotional health side of things through your work?
Yeah, definitely. Like so much so that I went and got some more education in counseling myself about a year ago, just because I was realizing how much, and I see a lot of anxiety. That's the thing I probably see the most, especially working in the collegiate population. So yeah, I do. I would say probably 50% of what I do is mental health oriented, and the other 50% is mental performance focused. And they certainly do intertwine.
That's cool. Why don't we talk a little bit about that? Just kind of like the idea of managing stress and managing anxiety and maybe even managing anger. And just, when I talk to people now in this kind of, pandemic state, and they ask me about my own running, I always tell them, I'm just running right now to manage my own stress, and my own anxiety. And maybe that's true to a certain degree, but like how does that work with one's running and the management of stress and anxiety?
I think that everybody's really different regarding how that works for each person. Like I know some people who are thriving off high volume and they say that helps with their stress and they're really happiest in their life when they're running a lot. And then I know other people who are really tired by this whole ordeal, and for them it's better to back off and maybe even take a little break. And then people are so different as well regarding what strategies they like to use to manage their stress. Like some people just making sure they're spending time with friends and loved ones is ideal for them. Other people need to respect their need for solitude. Other people use strategies like meditation or some work with the breath in order to help manage moments of anxiety. And some people try to notice their thoughts and try to manage their thoughts. So it really varies a lot person to person, at least from my experience.
Yeah, Cheryl, I see you nodding there. What are your thoughts there?
Total agreement with Shannon. I think, you know, when we think about anxiety, we have to remember that anxiety can be beneficial, right? So it only becomes negative when we have difficulty controlling it to the point where it interferes with our daily lives. And I always tell my clients that the goal is not always to be happy or to always be up, right? We should have a normal fluctuation of emotions. So if we're stuck in any one place, then we want to focus in on why we're stuck in any one place. But if you're feeling great one day and not so great the next day, that's really okay. And to normalize that, put it into context, like I said before, with what we're currently dealing with, it really allows people the space to fully embrace their emotions, not allow their emotions to become the enemy, or in this case, allow their emotions to become the competition, where we're battling against our emotions and focusing our energies in places that are not constructive for us. So like Shannon said, it really is about how we think about this, how we approach it, and what role we allow our emotions to play in any aspect of our lives, but especially when we're trying to maintain a sense of normalcy when it comes to our performance athletically.
And Lisa, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think Shannon and Cheryl have both done a really good job of explaining this. I think I totally agree that it is a very individual perspective and something that each person is going to have to do some reflection and have some awareness about where that stress is coming from and maybe what's triggering that, and also recognizing that we're in this time of a lot of change and uncertainty, and that can be adding into just how we're managing our day-to-day. And we want to look at not only our physical energy, but our psychological and emotional energy too, because that can impact how we're dealing with things. And so wanting to make sure that we're able to have times to recover both psychologically and physically, because that's going to help to just make us feel a bit more in balance or a bit more centered, and then be able to respond to some of those different stressors in a more positive and helpful way.
And how can we recognize when like our running and our kind of behaviors, you know, a lot of runners are type A type people. How can we recognize when those things are kind of pushing our stress and anxiety like out of balance?
I think when you start seeing behaviors that are not typical for you. So when we talk about being very individualized, you may realize that you are running a lot more than normal, right? Or you realize that you're not running at all. And is that typical for you? And benchmarking against yourself versus benchmarking against others. I always say in a time like this, Strava is like your worst enemy.
Oh, yeah.
Social media is your worst enemy. It seems like everyone is out there, you know, keeping the mileage up except for you. And sometimes when we see people, you know, running 20 miles before they get up in the morning, you know, as soon as they get up, that could be some emotion that they're working through. Right? And that could be a coping mechanism for them that we may not need. And so we have to be very cognizant to benchmark against ourselves. And when we feel stuck, right, I can't get out of a rut, that might be another indicator that something else might be going on as well. So just being in tune to self and understanding where we are off of what is typical for us is very important.
I'm glad you brought that up about Strava, because it's been, and even just like having that benchmark against yourself when the pandemic first started, I know for myself, I just like struggled to get out the door for like 3 or 4 weeks. I barely ran, and it took me a while. It took me that long to recognize that, oh, okay, this is not normal for me. This is affecting, you know, my mood and my interactions with my family. Like I need to, I need to take that first step and just get out for a 3-mile jog or something. And I think it's like taking those baby steps, right, to kind of find your way again. And obviously we've already talked some about the kind of the change and uncertainty, but how can we manage that in running and day-to-day life right now with everything that's going on? Is there anything in particular that we should be thinking about as runners right now?
One thought that I've had that's been helpful for myself, and I think it's been helpful for some athletes, is just the notion that nobody knows what to do right now in order to make anyone their best at any point going forward. Like the two running teams that I'm involved with, primarily, they have coaches that are making like good guesses. You know, they're making good guesses about how to use this time, and I can see that really helping. Like I can see having a program to follow. Trying to follow somebody else's best guess really seems to help a lot of people. But within those teams, there's a whole lot of modification too. So one thing that I saw when lockdown happened early on, more like let's say early April, is I had athletes who didn't feel motivated to run at all. And then I had athletes who all of a sudden wanted to go after Strava segments. Like it was like a complete polar opposite of desires. And sometimes they were on the same team. So like one person would be one person who didn't want to run is watching their teammate and they're going, am I not motivated enough? Do I not care enough? And the other person is watching their teammate and they're going, am I crazy? Am I going to burn out? Like, should I even be doing this? And there's so much doubt. But I just think the thing is that nobody actually knows what to do. So it's a terrific opportunity to like listen to yourself and experiment. And I would say listening to yourself and experimenting with what you think your heart wants and your body wants, this is a great time for that. Yeah, in these uncertain times.
Yeah, that's really good. I know when this first came about, we with Mouts Marathon, with a lot of our athletes, we just kind of tried to get people to think about the why behind their running. It's like, okay, now all your races are wiped off the calendar, but you still have a purpose. Everyone has a purpose beyond that, just to kind of explore that. And I think that was a good activity certainly for a lot of people to do.
Mm-hmm, for sure.
And if this got me thinking that if people, are having a lot of doubts, having a lot of thoughts of, uncertainty in these times, or in any regular times, even, how do you know when to access a mental performance consultant or a psychologist? How do you know when is a good time for that? I know I had times in my, certainly when I was in my elite running career where, there's some dark times that I didn't really know what to do or who to go to, or what it would involve, what to expect when you're kind of accessing those professionals. So I don't know, Cheryl, if you want to start talking about what it would look like in your realm, and then maybe Lisa and Shannon can contribute there as well.
Right. So, I think that therapy can be a scary word, right? Do I need to go to therapy? And when we talk about coaching, sometimes that feels safer. And so if you're feeling like something is off, and you're in the realm where you have access to performance coaches, I think that's a great gateway, because those coaches are really trained to ascertain if we need a higher level of, let's say, intervention, right? So being able to assist someone in deciding, can I manage these things? Is there perhaps something more systemic going on? Sometimes a pandemic can trigger something that was already brewing in us, right? And therapy can be very complementary to whatever is going on with a very specific performance coach. So when we're thinking about what actually happens in therapy, a lot of it is really around noticing those irrational thoughts and giving people tools to restructure those, learning how to stop those thoughts, replacing negative self-talk with positive thoughts, learning how to relax your mind and body, techniques to manage stress. So a lot of those tools that you put in your toolbox that you're able to pull out when it's most appropriate is what you're doing in therapy. And that can be very complementary with the performance coaching piece, where you talk about things that are specific to your athletic goals. And so neither one of them should be scary, but if you had to start somewhere, I would say looking around you, the resources that are available, your coach, specifically someone like Dylan, and just normalizing. And I think it's great that you, Dylan, are able to share some of your own challenges with the pandemic so that when you're working with athletes, it's normalized for them, that conversation can begin. And having talks like this where you have access and people will know that, wow, these performance coaches actually exist and I can access them. And Shannon has already shared that they do have training and counseling. And so if we need to go to a higher level, they have assistance and support there. So never a straight answer because it's all unique, but those are just some thoughts.
Cool. Lisa, any further thoughts there?
Yeah, so I think in terms of mental performance consulting, more specifically, I'll start with that maybe, is that you can go access it at any point. It's not something you have to wait until you're struggling. You can look at how you can make improvements, what's working for you, how to enhance some of those things. But you can also look at maybe weaknesses or areas that you're struggling with and then start to develop skills and strategies to improve those areas. So some of that assessment I think can be really helpful, and it can enhance your performance even if things are going really well, but it can also look at how you can start to improve as an athlete. And I think a lot of people are wanting that. So that's one thing to keep in mind. You don't have to wait till you're struggling to access it. And the second piece of that is because these things tend to be skills that need practice. So you want to practice your coping or your stress management or visualization or whatever it is that you're targeting. You need to do that on an ongoing basis. And so the more time you have to practice that, the better you're going to get. Just like you wouldn't go to one track practice and think you're ready for a race. You don't do mental training once and think you're ready to go out and be as mentally tough as you can be. So anytime you can have that practice with a mental performance consultant and also do the work on your own, I think it's going to make a difference. And then on a similar note too, if you feel like things are maybe elevated or it's a non-sport specific concern, accessing a counselor or a psychologist is never going to be necessarily a bad thing. It's just about being able to reach out and have those conversations and look at how you can, again, apply different strategies to your day-to-day life in order to make improvements.
Cool. I think that's, that's a lot of really good points in there. Something that stuck out to me is like not that you can't just go once and expect that it's, I've been guilty of that myself, not so much with mental performance consultant, but with like a physio or a nutritionist or someone who maybe has not a primary influence on your day-to-day running, but you expect this like magic bullet from them off of one visit. So I think that's that's a really great point. Shannon, any other thoughts there on what people can expect?
Yeah, I think both Cheryl and Lisa prompted some thoughts for me that I've got some to complement theirs, I think. So one thing I've noticed about the best athletes that I have been lucky to work with is they have a great deal of like self-awareness and a lot of emotional literacy. So what I would say by that is like they're really able to notice how they feel, notice what they think, and to be able to communicate that to you. And when I think of counseling or therapy, I think it's basically where you go to an expert to help you understand yourself. Like it's an experience of self-understanding. And at least you guys correct me for sure if I get this wrong, but you basically go there and you learn about yourself and you learn to pay more attention to your inner life. You learn ways of describing what's happening to you. And that seems to be a factor in being an excellent athlete. So I see time in therapy, gaining greater self-understanding as a performance enhancement strategy, honestly. And then the other point that came to me was, I think anybody who works in mental performance consulting is always so excited when someone comes along and says, hey, I don't actually know what to work on. I think I'm doing pretty great, but what can you do with me? Like, what can we do? And that's super exciting, because you can, as a mental performance consultant, you're passionate about excellence, you know? So you're like, okay, great. This is someone who is in a pretty good place. Like, we can do some cool stuff. We can experiment. We can dig in with something I've wanted to try, you know? And so yeah, like what Lisa was saying about don't wait till you're struggling. Definitely don't wait till you're struggling. You never know what level you could take your performance by working with a person to coach you in the mental area.
Well, that's a really good take home for me too, as a coach and working with athletes, to be, you know, more proactive in that area instead of waiting till things are starting to unravel and go wrong. It's like, well, you know, if you have the space for this, let's make it happen, or let's make the space for it in your kind of athletic pursuits. So that's really great. Folks, I want you to go ahead and ask us some questions if you have questions to kind of steer a conversation. I actually, at this point, I was going to try and talk more about how to optimize our current situation. I know Cheryl had talked about the emotions around running solo versus having once been in a group, and how people are dealing with that. But like, what are some of the strategies we can be using right now to adjust and optimize to our current situation? And like, what can I do in my life? Am I running to support that? And I know we had talked amongst coaches a while ago about different strategies that people were using, and that some people are using, and Shannon, you had talked about this as well, some people are using this time to like just go run a bunch of base mileage and just run a whole lot. And it's like a rare opportunity to do that. Or there's other people shifting focus completely and running training for distances they've never done. So I'd love to hear you guys, or all of your thoughts kind of on what we can do to optimize our current situation.
I tend to look at things systemically, right? So the fact that all of our races have been stripped from us so abruptly, what else is going on in life? So especially when you're distance training, marathon training, it really does take over your life. And there are things that we don't pay attention to when we're in the middle of marathon training. So you can use this time as an opportunity to say, well, what are those other things that I hadn't been paying attention to when I was in the middle of all of those long runs? What are some areas that maybe some people were saying to me, oh, you haven't done this, or we haven't seen you, or we haven't done these things, or we haven't had these conversations, or I haven't heard from you in X amount of time. These are opportunities to really pay a little bit more attention to things that are outside of our running realm, things that have maybe not gotten the attention that they deserved when we were so embedded in our training. So using that as an opportunity to spread yourself a little bit wider. And so that gives you an excuse to maybe run a little bit less intense, because we're investing in other aspects of our lives. So all of this is just reframing how we're visualizing what's actually going on, and the fact that we don't have these races to train for, but now we have a little bit of a break where we can actually look at the rest of our lives and establish relationships that maybe perhaps we haven't been giving a lot of attention to. So that's a great place to start.
I love that. I remember, when I was training at the top level myself, I was so focused on just that one task. I would even have a list of things like, these are things I'm going to do after I'm done the marathon. These are the people I'm going to connect with. So yeah, that's really brilliant. Lisa or Shannon, any other thoughts to add there?
Yeah, so I think one of the things you mentioned earlier, Dylan, was determining your why, and I think that's a really helpful thing to do. One thing I've done with some athletes is taking it a step further and looking at what are some of the things that you value in your day-to-day life and the things that you value about yourself and some of your characteristics. And so being able to come up with that list, whether it's I like working hard, I like collaborating, growth, whatever it is, those different pieces, looking at how you're addressing those values now that some of these different aspects of your life have maybe felt taken away. So not able to work toward races or working from home or all these different things. And so looking at how you can start to embody them and being able to use that as a way to develop some meaning and purpose. And that might not be met in the same way that training for a race might be, but I think that can be another really helpful step and just help us to feel like we're acting more intentionally through our day-to-day life.
And that's something like literally writing down this list of things, and is something you kind of would have people revisit from time to time.
Yeah, typically you see that values are fairly stable, but we can Google a list of values and you can get a list of like 20, 40 different things. And then you just go through and check them off. And then after that, if you have 20 different things, maybe you're narrowing it down to your top 10 or your top 5 and just looking at the ways that you maybe demonstrate those in your day-to-day life or how you demonstrate them through athletics or through other aspects. And it just helps you to have a sense of what it is that's important to you. But also if there are any gaps that you feel aren't being addressed with some of the changes and challenges right now.
Cool. Shannon, what about you?
Yeah, I think we've got a little bit of a theme of just leveraging this time when we don't have races. Like that's what I'm hearing. Very complimentary things from both Cheryl and Lisa on that. And it's funny. Like I think this time throws us off our usual schedule, but that can be a good thing. And like one area of my life and with the athletes I work with regularly that this has thrown us off is with my 2 main groups, I do these things called focus sessions, which is where every week we go through one form of mindfulness or visualization. And we do that together. They take 20 minutes and they're usually very performance focused. Like it's either a meditation or a visualization, focus on performance based around whatever races they have coming up. And we tend to just rotate through them depending on what the schedule looks like. But all of a sudden with no races and this indefinite stretch of time forward, we've dug into different forms of mindfulness far more thoroughly that have educated me and educated them. So just like, I'll throw a few references out there for people just so you know, like what we're diving into right now, I'm finding super interesting. So the first is the work of a woman called Tara Brach, who some of these ladies might be familiar with. She's a Buddhist psychologist who has some really amazing meditations that are certainly not boring and definitely help you work with some emotion. So we did a unit on that. And then I was introduced to mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, actually, which I called mindfulness-based cognitive enhancement because athletes like that better. But the work we used was by Jeffrey Schwartz and a book called You Are Not Your Brain. And that's completely fascinating about figuring out why you have emotional reactions to things and super performance related. And then as per the request of Rory Linkletter, actually, from Canadian, he says, hey, can you find out what Phil Jackson did with the Bulls? Like, because that whole, the last dance is this thing right now, right? Like so now we're doing Zen. So now it's Zen mind, beginner's mind. And so it's just like, it's created this opportunity to dive into things we never felt we had time for because there's always a race. So now there's not. So it's expanded my knowledge and our curriculum. And I think it's something I'll personally carry forward and people are liking it. And so, yeah, it's a time for learning.
That's really interesting. And we'll get, maybe we can get some notes together to send to attendees after, and we can reference some of the stuff that you guys have all mentioned for them. That would be awesome. But yeah, I think it's so true in my coaching of athletes now too, that it's just creating this space that, a lot of athletes that we coach that just don't have a background in they just jumped into being marathon runners, and that's what they know. And I'm like, hey, let's train for the 1 mile race. And they're like, what do you mean? That's so short. Why would that be interesting? But then that you can unravel that into, there's, you know, so many components of training for this race that is seemingly still, you know, long distance running. But so it's cool to see the parallels to kind of the mental performance and mental health side of things with creating these opportunities to do more and to do different things, and all with the goal at the end of the day coming out of this kind of better, more well-rounded people, right?
And Dylan, this is really a time for us to trust our bodies, right? So everyone here are athletes. And whatever it is that we do to maintain and bridge the gap during this time, when we come back, we're going to come back stronger. You know, our bodies have memory. We have muscle memory. The pandemic is not going to take us completely out of the game. Once we get back to a sense of normalcy, just trusting that we'll be able to transition comfortably back into what is familiar. So just understanding that this is temporary, and utilizing the time that we have now is very important. Reframing all of this and trusting ourselves, trusting our bodies to be able to figure this out is very important to move us forward and move us past. We don't know how long we'll be here, but even if you're only running, you know, if you're used to running 50 miles a week and now you're running 15, you're still running, right? Your body is still working. It's not forgetting how to run. It's not forgetting how to train. It's not forgetting those things. So that's very important too, when we talk about what can we do during the gap.
Yeah, that's so important. I think I would almost liken it to having injury, and people viewing that as a setback, but it does not have to be a setback. You will be back. You will be, you will get to that point where you were, and you will get better, and people have to we all have to wrap our heads around that. I'm still wrapping my head around that, but it's so important. Very interesting. And I mean, I think that ties into a topic that I hear a lot about more and more these days, is the word resilience, and people, needing to, there's tons of challenges in these times, and we're needing to kind of build that resilience. I just love to talk a little bit about what is resilience. How do we develop it? How do we use that to better adjust to everything that's going on? Don't be shy.
So I think when we hear the word resilience, there's a couple different ways that we can look at defining that. Some people think it's the ability to bounce back after a challenge. Other people look at how you're actually actively preparing for challenges so that when they happen, you're better prepared and better equipped to respond to them. But I think ultimately resilience is about going through something challenging and being able to come out the other side. And even if we just look at ourselves as runners, we go through challenging things in terms of our training, in terms of the discomfort that a race will bring. And so I think we have a lot of those skills developed already, and it's looking at what do we use as athletes and how can maybe we apply that to what we're going through right now. And I think there's a lot of transferability of those skills, but also looking again, going back to the idea of gaps or weaknesses, is there anything else that I can be learning right now? And being able to look at how you can maybe enhance your coping or be able to enhance your skills in some way. So those would be some initial thoughts.
Cool. Shannon or Cheryl, anything more to think about there?
Yeah, so resilience has been studied a lot, actually. And we've got some stuff that is pretty similar to what Lisa just said. But when psychologists have studied resilient people, what tends to characterize the most resilient people are the people who can, again, similar to what Lisa was saying, notice strengths within themselves that are enduring. So, and use those strengths purposefully going forward. And then to try to see anything in the moment that is negative or restrictive or constraining as temporary. So to focus on your enduring qualities and your enduring skills, and trust in them and believe in them and actively use them wherever you can in your life, is a behavior that can help to grow your resilience or activate your already like natural capacity for endurance. And definitely recognizing that anything constraining right now is temporary is another way to enhance your endurance.
And I like both of those. The only thing I would add is when I think about resilience, I think about remaining present focused, right? So really living it today. I talk a lot with my clients about this. And, you know, depression lives in the past, anxiety lives in the future, right? And so really the only thing that we can control is what's happening today. And so when we think about resilience, when we don't spend too much time in the past, don't worry too much about things that have not happened yet, things that we don't know are going to happen. And really, where's my strength today? What can I influence today? What do I have power over today? Is really where I like to bring my clients back. And it's the hardest thing to do because we all want to live in the past or the future, even myself. So it's a daily challenge to just try and remain present focused. What can I influence today? What can I change today? What can I control today? And once we understand that, that's where we really start moving forward in the direction that we would like to go when we focus on where we are today. And we use the past and those experiences to influence the thoughts, but understanding that we're basing it on where we are today is really important.
That's brilliant. Yeah, that's great. That has so much like application to runners and their, I mean, obviously your approach to life, but your approach to training on a day-to-day basis, being able to have that focus and that approach is, you know, will really set people up to be successful. So that's really something for everyone to really hone in on, I think, and keep in mind.
One other thing, just based on what Cheryl said, I know sometimes it can seem really overwhelming and there's lots of uncertainties, and she talked about being present focused, with it. I think it's fantastic. Sometimes it's just, what's the smallest thing I can do right now that's going to move me forward? And that can be a really helpful way, especially if you're feeling overwhelmed and anxious and unsure, to start moving yourself in that direction. And that first step can be difficult. Just some days getting out the door can be difficult to run. What's the first small manageable action that I can take? And Cheryl, that was just something that came up when you were talking.
Cool. That's great. I've realized now that I've just neglected some questions that came in here to the board from Jared. So Jared, thank you for your questions. One that kind of stood out to me, you know, before this conversation, I would have linked it to resilience, but now I have a better understanding of what resilience is. But he asks, is mental toughness a nurture or nature thing? How much can someone actually improve on their mental toughness? Is there a school of thought that some have naturally stronger pain resistances than others? I've been to dig into that. I've often had athletes say, you know, oh, I couldn't do that workout because I was mentally weak out there. And I think that's just kind of along the lines of where Jared's going.
We're looking like we don't know who wants to speak up.
I can speak on the pain tolerance and the perception of being mentally weak. And so what I feel like through my time with athletes is, it's not so much how mentally tough someone is, it's how sensitive your stress system is that limits you in speed and endurance sport. So some people, I'll take it back to The Last Dance because it's something that's right now being talked a lot about in my world, but you watch like Michael Jordan, and Michael Jordan can go out there on the court and like put the screws to himself and excel, you know. And basketball is a different sport than running too, but for whatever reason, for Michael Jordan, he can like be super hard on himself, get mad at somebody, and that's his trigger to excel. Whereas for an endurance athlete, a runner, arguably a different disposition. A lot of runners are a very different disposition than that. You know, if they're going to go be aggressive with themselves and tough with themselves, many will blow up because they're just not built like that. the stress system is not built like that. So I guess part of it is nature. A part of it is nature. But I think you can be tough and relentless, but you got to figure out how that looks for you. So for some people, getting mad at their competitor in their head works for them. For other people, telling themselves all sorts of kind, compassionate things is how they are relentless. So the trick is to figure out the type you are and figure out how mental toughness looks like for you. That's yeah.
Cool. Lisa or Cheryl, do you have anything to add to that?
I'm reacting to mental toughness because, what does that mean, right? And who defines if you're tough or not? How do you define it? And if you say, well, I wasn't tough enough during that workout, well, what does that mean? How do you know what was enough? And usually it's not about how mentally tough you were, but it could be about something else that was going on during that workout, right? So I'm always exploring, okay, well, what's the meaning behind what you just said? And what are we benchmarking toughness toward? Are we benchmarking toward Michael Jordan? I don't know, I'm not, right? I'm realistic about my environment. I'm realistic about my capabilities. I'm realistic about, where my body is at any given time. And so what looks like toughness, like Shannon said, to one person can still be just as tough and look completely different to another person. So when you're questioning your mental toughness and whether it's nature or nurture, a lot of it is really semantics and how you define it and how you approach your goals. And oftentimes we know when we've put our all into a workout, and sometimes we know when we haven't. And there are various reasons for either one of those scenarios. Just own it, accept it, and then move forward.
Yeah, I think another piece too is if you're saying, well, I wasn't mentally tough, it's looking at what was lacking for you. And sometimes that can be a really good starting point to have that exploration and to try to figure out maybe what was different from a previous workout where you felt great, what was going on today. So looking at some of those skills that maybe you were using or weren't using. So maybe what was lacking, but also giving yourself some of that kindness and compassion and think, okay, but what was I doing? And so it probably wasn't a total waste, looking at some of those pieces that you were putting into play that maybe you're not giving yourself enough emphasis for. But I think looking at the bigger picture can be really helpful too. So if you didn't have a great sleep last night, or you've got lots of stress going on in your life that you didn't have last week, those can be the bigger picture that sometimes impact, again, that emotional energy and that psychological energy, which maybe make us not as able to cope or feel as mentally tough for a certain workout or a certain week or something like that.
Cool. A lot of great takeaways there. And Jared, hopefully you heard those and those help. Knowing Jared, he's benchmarked himself against like Hercules or someone like that. So it's about your frame of reference a lot of the time. That's great. Shannon, I picked up on something that you mentioned in trying to be, relentless, and it was about, someone talking positively to themselves with a lot of, saying nice things to themselves. Can you maybe start speaking, and then I'd love to hear Cheryl and Lisa's thoughts too on what is positive self-talk, how is it effective, and like how can it influence your performance?
Yeah, so positive self-talk is just basically saying helpful things to yourself during the time that you want to be at your best, and can take some time to figure out precisely specifically how that looks for you. So I had one athlete in particular that kind of loves to hate the guy ahead of him. And positive self-talk to him is, I'm going to get that mother, you-know-whatter.
Yeah,
And you can get him, you can get that, like the stuff that he has to say is, obviously I'm not saying it. So, but then I also know an athlete who, when she starts to get that first moment of feeling like she can't hold the pace, she literally imagines in her own mind herself putting her hand on her own head and saying, hey, we're good. You just hang it, you just hang in there. Like, we're good. And so it's much softer almost like she's talking to a child. And it just varies so much person to person what works for them. And I finished talking before, and I was like, oh, I said nature, but I need as if nature is determining this. As I got halfway through what I was gonna, I think what I should have said. So I believe nature does govern a little bit, maybe what approach is best for us. But we can learn how to nurture ourselves and therefore grow enormously past what we might be are naturally inclined to do when it comes to managing pain or being mentally positive or mentally agile is another word that sometimes is preferable over mental toughness.
Oh, I like that. That's good.
Yeah.
And I think in terms of starting to work on some of that positive self-talk, sometimes it's like, again, some of this reflection where you sit down and you make a list of things that you've said to yourself in workouts or races, and take some of those negative things. I can't do this. This is too hard. I can't hold the pace. Whatever those thoughts are that you're having, and then think about how you'd like to respond or what you'd like to say to yourself when that happens. Or another approach can be, what would you want someone else to say to you if they were there to talk you through it? And so planning that out ahead of time. When you're running and when you're in that moment, it's more difficult to think logically and to have that thought process in place. So to have something that's planned and easily applicable is then a lot smoother transition to applying that positive self-talk when you are starting to go down a more negative road.
That's really interesting, because that reminded me of in university, our coach used to say these things to us during races that we thought were ridiculous and didn't really apply to like this situation. But then I remember like in future races saying these same things to myself and being like, I can't believe this is actually like working for me right now, but it does in some situations.
Yeah, I really like what Lisa said about what would somebody else say. Because oftentimes when we really think about the things that we have said about ourselves, we probably would not tolerate it from somebody else saying it about us. And really doing that benchmarking too. Well, would I want someone to say this to me that I'm saying about myself? And, you know, reframing negative thoughts into more positive thoughts is really about, you know, what is positive for you? What works for you? And Shannon, I like your example too. I mean, it can look different. It can look really aggressive, or it can look very soft and compassionate. But the bottom line is that you can't beat yourself up harder than you would allow someone else to do it. And if you always kind of remember that, it brings you back to a place where you're on your own team and you're not working against yourself.
Cool. And are these things that we should be like bringing into practice in terms of like writing them down and reminding ourselves what we need to, you know, race morning? I know some people like they'll even write these things on their arm, right, and like have a visual cue for themselves. Is there any like particular strategies that the three of you have seen work for people?
Absolutely. I think that if we don't plan, we plan. We fail to plan, we plan. We fail to plan, we don't plan, we fail, whatever that scenario is. If we fail to plan, then we plan to fail. So what that means is after every race, especially after a marathon, because when you're running a marathon, there's a myriad of thoughts that happen. And you run the whole gamut throughout that race. And one of the things that I like to do at the end of those races is really to kind of write down what I'm thinking immediately after the race. I'll process it later, but I usually just write down all those random thoughts. How am I feeling in the moment? If I'm very happy with the race, or if I'm not happy with the race. And then later, once I've recovered and, you know, I'm out of my emotions, I'll take a look at that. And I use that for the next race. And so absolutely write things down. Our memories are so fragile, at least mine at this point in my life. You know, I can barely remember what I did earlier this morning. And so it's important to write these things down so that you can see if there are any themes, right? There may be some recurring negative themes that we are saying about ourselves that we don't even realize we are continuously reinforcing. that are maybe working against us. So yes, absolutely write it down. If you need an escape and you put it on your arm, because in that moment you don't trust yourself to remember what nice thing to say, put it on your arm so that you remember what nice thing to say. And then you just, go through it afterwards. And all of that is part of race prep. I'm sure Shannon and Lisa, before you go into a race with your athletes, you talk about all those things. It's not just about the training, it's about the preparation and the strategy and how you're going to approach it. And you can't do that just off of a whim. You have to be prepared.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think a couple other things to add. I think self-talk is a really powerful tool. But on the flip side, just recognizing that when we do have some of those negative thoughts, they are temporary and we don't have to believe them. And just because a thought comes into our head, we don't have to latch onto it. We can let it go. And again, that can be a very mindful activity to practice our thoughts just passing through our head like a cloud or a car or something like that, whatever you find most meaningful. And so being able to practice that, I think, can be really helpful as well. Just recognizing that we start to attach meaning to our thoughts and we start to hold on to them. And in some cases that can be really beneficial, in some cases that can't. So again, just another strategy that you can be mindful of and applying, especially right now.
I think that's really good. I know that there's myself and probably a lot of other athletes that don't like to have a lot going on in your head. So I like that it's maybe not like replacing a negative thought with or having to have all these positive things, but just having some ability to push out those negative thoughts. So that's great. Shannon, do you have any more thoughts on that?
Yeah, I got a short little exercise people can try, which I think it could, yeah, when Cheryl and Lisa say what they say about planning in advance is absolutely true. Like, it's incredibly difficult to think of something helpful when you're already feeling rough out there in the middle of a race. So I do something called a mental performance plan with the athletes that I work with. And just to condense it down for the purposes of this is, I always start by asking athletes to decide who they want to be as an athlete that day. And that's a big question, right? Who do you want to be? I usually encourage people to come up with 2 words that are athlete specific and at least 1 word that is human being specific. So maybe like confident, friendly, relentless, or hungry, driven, passionate. I'm just pulling these out of nowhere, but roughly 3. And then what we do is we divide the race into thirds or quarters usually. And we ask, at this point in the race, what do you need to be focused on in order to be who you want to be? At this point, and then at the second part of the race, what do you need to be focused on in order to be who you want to be? And third, same, fourth, same. It's always, what do you need to be focused on at this point to be who you want to be? And then they use it in their workouts. So most distance runners have 2 workouts a week. They would come in advance with those 3 or 4 thoughts, what they're going to focus on to be who they want to be. And they're just creative with their workouts. So maybe you've got 12 by a K on a given day. And you've divided your race into quarters. For the first 3K, you're going to focus on your first focus. For your next 3K, you're going to focus on your second focus. And your third 3K, you're going to focus on your third one. And by then, it gives you a chance to see if those thoughts are going to work for you and also practice them so they're more automatic when you eventually do race. That's a super short.
No, it's cool. And I mean, it's like race planning that a coach would do with an athlete around, like pacing strategy for, for your marathon stuff. It's another component that athletes have to know can really have a lot of positive impact for them. So it's really cool. I wish you guys were around back in 2010 or so when I was running. Would have been great. I know it's going on 9:07. I don't know what time people plan to be here for but did you guys maybe have a few more minutes to talk about goals? Because we're like, I'm always talking to my athletes about goals, but this is like really uncertain times. There's no races on the calendar. There's some virtual races, but there's no the real races that people are used to preparing for and setting all their goals around. They just don't exist. So I'd love to hear all all of your thoughts and potential strategies for athletes around how to set goals right now. Anyone want to take a stab? Everyone's like,
I'll start. Goals. When we look at the reality and the uncertainty of the times that we're in, one thing that we do know is that there are no races. We know that. So who do we want to be, like Shannon says, for the race, but who do we want to be on the other side of the pandemic, right? We can automatically think about some of those things without necessarily having a timeline of when those things are going to actually occur or when the other side will present itself. You know, right now, who knows? Sometimes it feels like it's almost there, we're almost at the other side, and then we hear something else on the news and we're like, oh, not quite yet, stay home. So setting the goals for, okay, this is who I want to be. I just want to be able to still run when I come out of this. I want to be able to maintain a certain level of fitness when I come out of this. I want to be able to maintain emotional stability while I'm going through the pandemic. I want to be able to nurture my relationships or redefine my friendships while we're going through this. I mean, really just focused in on what is happening now, what we understand to be our present circumstances, allowing those goals that have benchmarked us at, I guess, the end of March, we can pick those up again on the other side of this. So those goals aren't going anywhere. So in the meantime, what do we want to set to benchmark ourselves to get us through this process is really important for goal setting. And it's important to have goals. As athletes, if we don't have something to strive for, we have no purpose for walking around, you know, what's my purpose in life, right? So we are, by the nature of an athlete, you're always striving towards something. And we just have to redefine what that is for this particular moment. And it can be sport related, or it can be tangential to the sport. It doesn't have to be directly related. So that's one approach that we can consider when we're looking at goals and having to lay down, you know, those big marathon dreams.
yeah, I think that's really good, because we do get so hooked on these big marathon dream goals, and well, this is the date that this is happening, so we have to be ready. And what I do today is you know, so fully impacting every other day, and this kind of domino effect. So it's yeah, that's great to really remind people that that's not everything, and that is going to be there for us again. So Lisa or Shannon, do you guys have stuff to add there?
Yeah, I think this is like almost the hardest question right now is, what do you do about goals? It's a super hard question. I actually really enjoyed Cheryl's response. To me, that's motivating right now, is who do I want to be on this other side of the pandemic? Like, I'm kind of like, oh, this is a unique time. Like, I can do things with this time, and I'm, to be honest, kind of terrified of not doing them before this thing changes. So that's personally very motivating. One question that I've been asking athletes that seems to be helpful is saying, what do you need to do today to be excited to race whenever that is one day? And just like really emphasizing to be excited to, because that leaves some freedom for whatever their natural inclination is right now as far as how intense they want to be. So some of them will answer, in order to be excited to race, I would not run all week, you know, like that kind of thing. Whereas others will be like, oh, I'm going to go get King of the Mountain on Strava on Saturday, you know, that kind of a thing. And just, what do you need to do to be excited today to race? What do you think, you know, you need to do to excited today to race when the time comes again? It's been useful.
And how often are you revisiting that with athletes? And are they like changing and flip-flopping? People who are like super, you know, driven on that, I want to get that KOM, are they coming back to you a few weeks later and being like, and you know what, I'm just kind of gonna chill here, and I don't need those anymore? Or are you seeing some patterns in that? Or,
you know, I'm not seeing a lot of fluctuating except for one, and the one that's fluctuating was hard at it from the get-go. Like the minute lockdown happened, that she was like intense and training and chasing, and just last week was the first time I saw her be like, I don't know. She's like, I'm in a funk. You know, and only one. The other, I have to say, having a coach is so good and so helpful. Like, I really feel like if an athlete can kind of take accept the coach's plan and perform it well, it takes so much off them if they really trust the coach and they know the coach has their best interest at heart. So yeah, it would just be the one person.
Cool. I didn't pay Shannon to make that plug for great coaching.
It's true that it's really true though. It hands off some of the thinking, a lot of the stress and thinking.
100%.
Yeah.
And Lisa, any thoughts there on what goals are all about right now? What we should be doing? What you're seeing with people you're working with?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we can be thinking about or reminding ourselves about is as athletes, obviously being driven and wanting to move forward, just having that commitment to moving forward in a valued direction, but knowing that some days that might be really big steps and knowing some days that might be small steps. And again, that's okay. It's being able to have that awareness and that recognition of, like Shannon was saying, this is what I need to do today, or this is what I need to kind of honor today. And so I think that can be helpful just to recognize that the things we are doing are adding up and that they will be helpful from a long-term perspective. And sometimes that can be really good, but also having the thought that if I can be an expert of now, if I can celebrate what I'm doing right now, that can help to maybe build some momentum or just feel like I'm having some small successes or those small wins. And sometimes that can be really beneficial too. So those are a couple different pieces that I think can be helpful in terms of maybe not necessarily going through that goal setting process, but just being mindful of just the bigger picture and what we're in right now.
100%. We gotta keep our eyes on the bigger picture, but also know that day to day, there's little wins out there to be had, right? For everyone in everything. So life can be super challenging right now. People got to be kind to themselves and make sure that they're not, not too focused on anything with too much laser focus and intention. I think that's what I'm hearing. That's what I'm trying to tell myself. Am I right?
If you asked yourself, can the world just stop? How many times have you said that to yourself? Can the world just stop? Can everything just slow down? Just give me a break, right? We've said that so many times. And guess what? The world has pretty much stopped. And we're complaining about it, right? I'm so happy that it's slowed down, and really trying to think about that. When are we going to have this opportunity again? What's going to be the place in history? What's going to be your pandemic story, right? So really trying to make it a little bit bigger than just what we've lost, but what is this opportunity that we'll probably never get again, right? And how is this going to make us even stronger, better, more agile, more mentally tough athletes, right? If you can get through a pandemic and come out of the other side and hit your marathon goals and hit some of those races on the other side of this, that's a win. And so really being strategic about what this race looks like can really help us visualize this as something that's not as negative as it appears to be on the surface. We asked for this somehow. We asked for the world to slow down. It slowed down. And now how are we going to use that time?
Love it. Lisa, you has a thought there.
Yeah, there is something that came out of what Cheryl was saying. I think we're, as athletes, often so outcome driven in terms of races or different things that we're wanting to do. And often those can be in the distant future and we're working towards those. But looking at being able to bring that in and some of the shorter term things that we can be doing. And sometimes it's going to be more process focused. So all part of the journey. And maybe sometimes that's also looking at how we're defining success. And so success maybe in the past was doing a race or hitting a time or those kinds of things. And if we can start to evaluate what that is right now, I think that can also provide some meaning and some motivation.
Yeah, that's so key. I know especially with some of my athletes who, life's circumstances really changed through 3, 4 kids at home all of a sudden, and like just getting out the door, celebrating that on any given day, or on the flip side, not being hard on yourself if you don't. It's understanding the situation you're in, and being willing to adapt to it is so key. Cool. Well, I mean, I think I've loved this conversation. I think this is probably a good place to stop. Ladies, thank you so much for your time. This has been wonderful. I appreciate it so much. I know all the crew that's been tuned in, and this is recorded, so people will get to see it later too. We all appreciate it.
Great, thank you. It's been great. Great conversation.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Awesome. Everyone, stay safe. And if you're like me, it's like 35 degrees here. Stay cool if you need to stay cool. And have a great night.
You too. Bye.
Thanks.